Thank you, Christine, and welcome again, everyone. I believe I was supposed to share these slides ahead of time, but now that we're through that, I'll skip straight ahead. We did want to start off by sharing a quick audience poll. So if you could go to menti.com and use the code that you see on the screen, it's a quick question just asking you to identify yourself so we know who we have in the audience today. So if you can take a quick minute to do that, and then we will dive right in. So welcome to our panel, focusing on Parklets and Open Streets initiatives as strategies really to support local business. And thank you so much for joining us. This is really exciting that we have such a wide range of participation. I'm Shruti Shankar, as Christine mentioned. I'm Senior Urban Designer at Studio 111. We are a design practice based in Long Beach, and we're really an integrated practice of architecture, urban design, as well as landscape architecture. And we've been working on parklets and outdoor dining initiatives in Long Beach and in other California cities since before the pandemic. In fact, we designed some of the earliest parklets in Southern California as pilot initiatives in the city of Long Beach. So parklets themselves are not a new idea. They've been around for over a decade now. And it's fundamentally the concept of converting a street parking spot into an extension of the sidewalk to create more space for people. The idea really originated in San Francisco, and since then it's been made popular throughout the world, really, through initiatives like Parking Day, which is an event that happens once a year, and people can pay for a parking space on the street and use it as an outdoor recreation zone rather than just park their cars there. So parklets may remove parking spots from local main streets and business districts, but they can also boost foot traffic by providing more recreational space and more opportunities for people to be on the street. They can also make drivers more mindful of speed limits and encourage alternative modes of transportation by making it more friendly to walk and bike, and make space for amenities like bike parking and so on. So overall, they have the potential to make our streets more attractive and vibrant for people and really encourage greater economic activity. Now, in our early work on parklets at Studio 111, we focused on using parklets in partnership with local restaurants to provide outdoor dining. And we've had many lessons learned along the way on how parklets can support local economic activity and really help businesses thrive. But as you know, we've really seen this idea take off in the last year when a lot of restaurants and retail businesses could no longer have customers indoors with all the public health regulations that came with the COVID-19 pandemic and that we're still experiencing today. So overnight, we saw many cities adopt regulations that could provide for temporary parklets and open streets initiatives that would take space away from cars and really make room for safe outdoor spaces on the street that enabled local businesses and restaurants in particular to a great extent to continue to operate. So in today's panel, we have a fantastic group of people who were all pioneers in these initiatives with their respective businesses or in their cities, and who will be sharing their experiences with us. And some of the things that we'd like to discuss today are: how do these programs get implemented? How were they designed? What were some of the barriers and challenges to implementing them? And how did they innovate to get these strategies on the ground? What is happening now, with the roller coaster of COVID-19 that's still continuing, and what challenges do these programs and initiatives continue to face? And what does the future look like? How will the experience of the pandemic change the way we approach these kinds of ideas in the future? So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and do a quick show and tell of a parklet or an open street project that they've spearheaded. We were going to start with Luis Navarro from the city of Long Beach. I'm not certain if Luis is joining us.
Luis, hi, this is Kraig. Luis just texted me. He's got an emergency at one of his restaurants. He's going to be unable to join us tonight.
Okay.
So he's stuck in one of his kitchens right now. So he just sent me a text. So I apologize, but it's been a crazy year for restaurants, as everyone realizes, and he does send his apologies.
Thank you, Kraig. Thank you for letting us know, and hopefully it gets resolved. I will go ahead though and quickly introduce the project that Luis was going to talk about, which is the Parklet associated with his restaurant business, Lola's Mexican Cuisine. The Parklet itself was something that Studio 111 worked with Luis to design for Lola's, you know, a long time ago. I want to say a decade ago, and then since then we've had a refresh. This was one of the earliest parklets in Southern California, and really a pioneering idea to bring outdoor dining onto the sidewalk, onto the street, and take away a parking space to convert that into space for people. And the earlier version of the Parklet did not have sort of the structure and the frame above it. It was much more simple with a platform with planters and landscaping and outdoor dining for seating. And since then, the Parklet has undergone a transformation with a lot of use over the years and providing a great deal of presence for the restaurant on the street. I'm going to turn it over next to April Walker from the City of Long Beach to talk about Long Beach's Open Street Initiative.
Hi everyone, my name is April Walker. I am a project management officer for the City of Long Beach, Department of Public Works, and I have been part of the Long Beach Open Streets program since its infancy, which is May 2020. So the city has an established permanent parklet program, and we were really hard pressed to put this Open Streets program together rather quickly in May when the indoor dining shut down completely. And that's about the time that we went from 50% to 0% of indoor dining. And we really had to think outside of the box as to how we would repurpose our right of way, how we would permit private property that previously was required by code to satisfy a number of other requirements not associated with business activity or outdoor dining. And so over the course of the last, I would say, 3 quarters, 9 months roughly, our team has grown. So just in Public Works alone, we probably have a dozen people working on this program. And then that does not include our fire, police, development services, health services partners that are also in some way, shape, or form part of this program as well. I could speak to this, to Open Streets for hours. We've really grown leaps and bounds from the time that we implemented this. We have shown that in many ways in the city, and I'm sure others have also, that things that we thought would take a while, when you need to, you will implement it quickly. And that's not to say that we are not planning to be thoughtful with how we permit our permanent parklets moving forward, but we understand that we have to be a little more creative and think outside of the box as we implement permanent parklets. A significant number of our parklet users, temporary parklet users, are interested and have started the permanent process. So I really want to just take another minute to talk about something that is not as common. So we have the parklets in the right of way, utilizing a parking stall, but I also want to share some other creative uses. So on the left-hand side, you'll see what we call the allery. This is in our Bixby Knolls area. Allery is alley plus gallery. It's actually a street, but they utilize a space and they turn it into a gallery. So you'll see that there's a mural and there's some artwork on the right side of that way, and lights, and they have First Fridays. So every first Friday of the month, this becomes like a maker space. They have small local creatives selling their art pieces. But when when COVID hit and we had to be creative, they turned this into an outdoor dining space. So technically still right away, but a creative use of that. On the right-hand side, you'll see this is also Bixby Knolls. You'll see that they really like their murals. This is actually a back parking lot. So it was literally a few stalls that butt up to an alley. And so you would never know that based on how they made this space. But I really wanted to show this because this is a true picture of a partnership These stalls used to be and include handicap. So we had our ADA coordinator out there to work with them on how they can relocate the handicap stalls and the things that they needed to do to satisfy the handicap requirements, but also be able to use a space for their outdoor dining. And then the next slide is another creative space. So this is in our Zafaria area. There's actually two restaurants. One's a sports bar, one is a higher dining, and they utilize their back lot, and they actually only use about 7 stalls to create what they now call the Oasis. This is just the beginning. There's still other components of this outdoor dining that they've since added. But if you see in the back, that's actually a ramp that satisfies ADA requirements. They have the stairs, they have the rails, they mounted TVs, they brought their high tops from the inside to the outside. And actually, you'll see that there's multi-unit buildings around here. They shared with me that they had a resident call the fire department because they had heard noise. This was also very early on. A lot of residents have concerns about outdoor dining. And when the fire department came, they said that if this were a permanent parklet, they would be completely up to code, just how they built it for the temporary basis. So a lot more to share. I'm looking forward to answering any questions that this group may have. And I'll turn it on to our next panelist. Thank you.
Thanks so much, April. Next up, we have Kraig Kojian from the Downtown Long Beach Association. Kraig, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Kraig Kojian with the Downtown Long Beach Alliance. We're a business improvement district. We manage 2 improvement districts in our downtown. One is on property and the other one is on business. The property-based improvement district has about 5,000 stakeholders contributing to the district, including about 3,500 residents of our downtown. The business improvement district, that's tenant-based, has about 1,700 businesses within the geographical boundaries of our downtown. Some of the areas of concentration that we have are advocacy, clean and safe, marketing and communications, events, economic development. For the purposes of economic development, it's really retention, attraction, and education, and placemaking. That's why we're representing here. And certainly we'll talk about our Open Streets program in greater detail relative to downtown. We are governed by our board of directors. One of our board of directors is on Alan Burks of Environ, who also chairs our placemaking committee. We do focus on placemaking, and that is really taking advantage of the public realm and maximizing the use of the public realm, including open space. Obviously, when COVID hit and the opportunity to expand the sidewalk space, this being a picture of Pine Avenue, which is pretty much the historical and main corridor of our downtown. We converted 2 linear blocks and closed it to traffic to open dining, extending the patio and sidewalk spaces of the adjoining restaurants out to almost the middle of the street, leaving some fire lane available for emergency vehicles. Some of the challenges that we faced early on was this was done very, very quickly without a lot of guidance relative to certain requirements that the businesses had. So at first we really kind of had to rein in both the city side as well as the business side. As you very well can imagine, from a business perspective, the businesses were trying to expand as much and as quickly as possible. And then we really had to get the city in line as far as what it would allow and certainly what enforcement and compliance look like, keeping the health orders in mind. This is not just any other time of the year that businesses could operate. This was a time of year and currently when businesses operated under a specific health order with social distancing in mind. So this is something that is currently, we're obviously reopening now based on the recent health orders being lifted earlier this week. So we'll see how this turns out. I know some businesses are willing to flip the switch and take on this space overnight. Others are being a little bit more methodical and strategic as far as coming back out from the dark and into the light relative to reopening their businesses and utilizing the open space with the new health orders. Information was hard to come by at first, but it certainly became a little bit more fluid. Obviously, knowing that the city had some standards and the businesses had to understand those standards. So the DLBA facilitated those meetings and certainly the flow of information very early on. And we still serve as a conduit of information and serve as a liaison between the business community and the public sector. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have with additional details relative to open streets and the Pine Avenue closure in particular. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kraig. We have one more great image of the parklet space that was created on Pine Avenue, so I wanted to share that. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Hiramoto from the City of Glendale, but before that, I also wanted to add, if you have any specific questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. Over to you, Jennifer.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be a part of this. So just for context, so I am the acting assistant director for the City of Glendale, and really my soft spot is within economic development. For the gentleman from Melbourne, and for those who don't leave the South Bay bubble, Glendale is just northeast LA County. We're a city of about 200,000 people. And we have a few business districts that really were primed to capitalize on parklets, one in our downtown. And you'll hear from Raul Porto, who's a member of the Business Improvement District and owner of Porto's. So that's on Brand Boulevard. And then we have a smaller neighborhood business district in North Glendale. So when COVID first started, at least from the economic development perspective, our role was really to develop this COVID recovery strategy. And we had about 6 action items, and many of them were implement grants and reach out to the community on just communication side. But for us, we saw that the establishing parklets on a temporary basis would be the most impactful way that local government can actually support restaurants and the employees. And that was a really big component of this to us too, is getting people, getting them working. And also was the most visible way to do so as well. We really saw that this would be a great marketing opportunity. And as I sat there and pitched to the neighborhood business district in North Glendale, who wasn't, I would say, as progressive and open to some of the parklets as on brand, we also let them know, look, if others see consumers out there, they will feel safer, and that will only encourage more diners to go out and to reactivate your business districts. So you can see the image here. We worked in collaboration with Studio 111. They helped us really brand it as well. And it evolved. I will say that one of the conditions that we had to deal with was weather. I remember getting a phone call in the summer from a woman who was complaining that the trees that we put out there were dying. And then a call, like literally the next call, from one of the restaurant owners who was saying, hey, are you guys going to get heaters for the winter? And are you going to provide us with tents? Because we need to prepare for the colder weather. So there really were a host of issues that we had to anticipate. And it's difficult to anticipate when you're just like trying to deal with the hand that you've been given. So anyway, this image here has our historic Alex Theater, but really it's Mr. Furley's, who, and this has been the fun part about parklets, continue to evolve even what Mr. Furley's was putting out. So as far as like TVs or additional tables and chairs or more tables and chairs. And as the county orders changed throughout the course of this, I would say that was one of the biggest challenges, is how do you encourage activation on the street while still making sure that you are complying with the county health orders as well. In the next image, if you don't mind, Shruti, this is one of the parklets from the North Glendale area, the Montrose Shopping Park Association. So the concern with Montrose, these are folks who are deeply, deeply tied to their parking spaces. And one of the issues that we had, it was really one of negotiation, where we had to go door to door to some of these businesses, the jewelry guy next door to the restaurateur, and really make the case for why the jeweler should take one for the team and allow the parking space in front of their business in order for the restaurateur to be able to take advantage of. But I will say, we ended up getting a total of 15 temporary parklets, about 70 restaurants to participate, and that equated to about 2,700 jobs in both districts. So we eventually got there, and I will say that while economic development took the lead, and I have a couple of folks who are actually on the panel today, Ani Pagosi and John Bandek on our team, doing the door-to-door work and marketing. It is a full team sport here between public works and business concierge, our business improvement districts, the businesses, on through finance as well. And we talk through challenges. We have several internal challenges that we can address as well. So with that, I think the next image is for Raul, and I will wrap it up there, and looking forward to talking this through with you all.
Thank you, Jennifer. Raul, can I have you go next and speak a little bit to the parklet at Portos, and in general your thoughts as part of the bid in Glendale?
Good evening. My name is Raul Porto, and I run Portos Bakery. As far as putting it together, to be honest, I didn't do anything. Jennifer took care of everything. So we didn't do, she actually called me and said, hey, do you mind if we do this? So the city was extremely proactive in trying to help the community, which I thought was pretty incredible. Usually that's not something, not to put any city down, but that's not something that you expect. So I was really pleasantly surprised, and they did it all. For us, all we had to do was basically just run it, basically. And I can tell you that the customers liked it a lot, as Jennifer mentioned. I think it, for a while, as you drove, anybody would drive down Brand, it looked kind of depressing and sad. And I'm sure you could say that for almost every city, just because there's nobody on the street, there's hardly any cars out there. So I think by doing this, it really changed the feel and the look of the city for the time being. But more and more, as things became normal and we got more used to it, I kind of liked it. I mean, I realized the challenges that you're going to have with the other retail stores that are more dependent on parking and such. But it really looks very nice. I mean, and as you're driving by, you guys can see this picture. So that's on the screen right now. As you drive by, instead of having a car that the rear end of a car that you're looking at, you're seeing this beautiful wall there, or low wall with the painting and stuff. And I'm sure as time goes on, we could probably devote more time to make it look even nicer. But I just think it looks really cool that you're driving down and you're seeing people outdoor dining, and then you can also see the sidewalk, so you can see people walking past. And for pedestrians, instead of having a car as you're walking down on the outside of the sidewalk, you actually get to see people having a good time, dinner or drinking or whatever. I just think long term, it's really, I would have never expected that it would look, we've been talking about this in the city of Glendale for years, maybe as far back as 5 years ago. And, for a million reasons, it never got done. And I don't think anybody ever got excited. I think here was with COVID, it really got everybody, it put a sense of urgency on everything we did. And I think probably the only way that it would have happened, for many reasons, including some of the other merchants that wouldn't have been in favor of it, and maybe even city council people that wouldn't have been in favor of it. So I think probably the plus side of this is that, or the upside of this, is that we got to try something we probably would have never tried. And we got to see, the pros and cons of how it works and where we could improve. And customers got to see it. I can tell you, customers like it a lot. The streets on brand, at least on our block, and in most blocks, but on our block, they tend to be a little bit narrow. So this is really nice because you could have, 2 aisles of seats and people are more relaxed, and it's just a great feeling. So we really liked it. I think it changed the dynamics of the city, the look of the downtown changed overnight. And now the dining seems like they're going to open it back up again starting later, I think tomorrow, I guess. I think this is going to be here for a little bit longer, and I think people are going to get to enjoy it. And I'm interested to see how this all turns out and what happens. But I think, I'm sure we all have a lot of concerns, but I think these cities, Long Beach and Glendale, and I know Pasadena near my house has done the same thing, really jumped on top of it and just got it done. And it really showed, how nice it could be and what a wonderful thing to have in the community. So, I don't think there's much more for me to say on that.
No, that's great. I think one of the sort of most visible outcomes has been literally being able to see more people outdoors and see
Right.
the life on the street. So
Right.
I think that's a really good point. Great. So those are our panelists today, and I'm happy to say we're going to be hearing a lot more from all of them. But before that, I just wanted to quickly see if we have received responses to our question about the audience. So we do have responses come in. So I want to quickly share who we have in our audience today, and then we'll dive into our discussion. So we have more participants in the call today, but it looks like we have a lot of architects. Welcome. We do have some folks who identify as designers. We do have agency staff, as well as some other folks. So thank you all for joining us again. And as we're going through the next 20, 25 minutes of discussion, if you have any questions for the panelists, please share them in the comment box, in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so for the sort of next discussion piece, I'd like to start really with some basics and talk about what were some of the fundamental design challenges or decisions that you had to make in converting space for parking into places for people. And I know when we worked with Louis on the Parklets in Long Beach that were part of the initial pilot programs, parking, for example, was a concern that came up a lot in terms of losing parking stalls. And we had to come up with creative ways of restriping the street. Oftentimes, the curb assignments on streets were outdated or could be restriped to make them more efficient. And we would have to identify those opportunities where we could actually gain more spaces while still taking some of them for the parklets. And that conversation, I think, has been ongoing over the past decade on whether the parklets provide benefits that go above and beyond the cost of a parking stall being lost. So that's definitely one aspect of the design challenge. I think there are several others. We could talk about, constructability, materials. We saw K-rails in a lot of the parklets in Glendale. I think in Long Beach, it's been a little bit different in terms of what materials were used to build them. There's questions about branding and identity. So I'd like to invite the panelists to just share their experiences about sort of the physicality of the parklets and what decisions you had to make about design and challenges that came with that.
I'll lead it off, thanks. The design features weren't a consideration in downtown anyways. The city simply provided K-rails for any business that sought to expand on their patio or their sidewalk. And so if in fact the establishment wanted to utilize this space, they would submit a permit with all the necessary requirements, including insurance, and the city would drop off the K-rails based on the footprint that they were going to take up. Now it would be the responsibility of the business owner to provide all the furnishings for their particular establishment, including lighting, including tables, chairs, whether their heat elements would be brought in. These are the things that we continue to look at as far as what is allowed and not allowed, especially moving more into inclement weather. Some of the establishments start putting up sidewalls to their K-rails. The city said that that these areas could not have, could only have one of those four sides covered. So it's now a matter of how are we going to protect the area from the inclement weather that we're obviously going to be getting in the next few weeks. From a design standpoint, there was no branding considered. We did recommend it, but the businesses felt as though that they were going to take probably the easier road and just putting together what they quickly could relative to raising the platform on the street to meet the curb line, if in fact it did extend out. Some of them didn't even do that. Some just put up, as you saw in the images that we displayed a little earlier, whether it be a wrought iron fence, a picket fence, or even just roping it off to delineate their space from anyone else's. We recommended signage. We recommended, local artists to design art features that would camouflage the K-rails, and some took advantage of that. Some artwork is great. Others just simply put up, the minimum in order to put their tables and chairs out there and maximize the space available. So we'll be, it'll be interesting to see on this iteration as we move into, the coming weeks with restaurants reopening. Long Beach was able to reopen its outdoor dining as early as this past Tuesday. We'll see more restaurants opening up. We'll see the kind of approach that they'll take. One of the things that we're looking at is how we can move from a temporary status to a permanent status. Long Beach has had, as you saw in the image of Lola's, Long Beach has had an ordinance that has permanent parklets available. And it's a fairly costly process to go through. It probably costs about $20,000 to $25,000 to create a permanent parklet, but we do have permanent parklets. All the permanent parklets that we had in our city were private. They were not public. So they were paid for by the adjoining business. They're managed and they're maintained by that business. They are not open for public use. They're open only for those restaurants and their patrons. It will be interesting to see how this is managed in the public right away on a temporary basis, and as we move into the possibility of doing this on a permanent basis, whether or not we will be advocating, and I'm saying as a public-private partnership between the city and the private sector, if we'll be advocating to brand and or if we'll, in fact, we'll have a policy that will maximize the space available for the individual establishments.
Hi, I can piggyback off of Kraig's thoughts since, we work together, and Kraig really has been instrumental in us getting Pine Avenue closure in place. And I think what's unique to the downtown Long Beach area is that is the only business, or what we call a commercial corridor, that we've closed to through traffic. So they have the opportunity to put up the K-rails and not have to implement a deck, because folks can walk from the street into that open dining space. Organically, folks just started putting up the plywood along the K-rails and started designing them on their own. And they each have their own personality, and personalities change from district to district. And it really happened that way because things really were so expedient. In a matter of 2 weeks, I believe we deployed 60 parklets. Currently, we have 107 temporary parklets serving 123 businesses, and that is because there are some businesses that may share a larger parklet. But they are pretty independent Many of these restaurants and businesses have their own parklet, and so they design it to what makes sense for the personality of their storefront. We don't typically have a standard for branding, nor do we require any branding specifics. We have policy and guidelines regarding decorative materials for mostly the safety and security of pedestrians, vehicles, and to ensure ADA access. We definitely want to be good partners with our businesses. We want to support economic recovery in any way possible. Our economic development team really leads the effort in supporting businesses from a grant and fiscal perspective. And I know that our city leadership is interested in promising and guaranteeing more funds should we receive them from state or federal agencies. So if we do receive another round of, for example, CARES funding in 2021, I know that we have prioritized our businesses. And so that's, I would say, the gist of it. A lot of the design really surrounds the safety and the infrastructure. So for example, the decking, we have requirements to ensure stormwater, when we have rains, there's no flooding. Specifications like gaps between the curb and the platform so that the water can run through. Same thing with the deck itself, that there's open grate systems so that the water can come through the deck. So far from a city perspective, and our permanent parklet is managed by our Public Works Department, we really look at things from an infrastructure perspective. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a great thing either, because it's really important that we start to kind of look at it from a lens of this bigger design perspective as we move this program forward. And we do imagine that there will be an influx, and we have gotten a lot of requests from businesses who have temporary parklets to move them toward permanent parklets. But again, don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but there's a lot of different conversations to be had. There's parking, there's the retail. I'm so glad that Porto's brought up the retail component, because there are retail businesses that say, hey, we think it's great that people are coming, but our customers need to park somewhere. So there's still a lot of components that we have to think about in the overall design of our program too.
Great. And Shruti, should I jump in or shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to just have you weigh in on that piece, and then I have a kind of follow-up off of that. Yeah.
Sure. So our approach in Glendale was we really tried to play up to the strengths of each of the business improvement districts, especially since we wanted to start there. And if other requests came in throughout the rest of the city, then we would have had kind of a strategy in which to deploy those. So for the business improvement district in Montrose, which was in North Glendale, they were very instrumental in at least identifying probably about 15 locations at first where we would actually put the parklets. And then they kind of said, okay, here at economic development, like you go talk to the businesses to figure out if it's actually possible. So that's where we spent a lot of our efforts. We whittled it down to 8 parklets. And then later, as folks saw the popularity of it, then that number eventually went up. A lot of the decisions were really based upon safety, and we work closely with the public works team as well to make sure it's not in the, too far into the public right of way, and the pedestrian path can still be maintained. One of the most amusing things about this very early on is the public works department worked wickedly fast in installing K-rail, and I didn't realize it at the time. They had so much K-rail, I guess, in the public works yard that we were able to just put those out. I will give like a piece of advice for anybody. If you are utilizing existing K-rail, you need to check that out before it goes out, because what happened was that K-rail went out and it was as though they pulled it directly from the side of the mountain, and it wasn't pressure wash, and it was just this like awful white. And I thought, when I saw that in the morning, and I thought, Yeah, I'm definitely losing my job over this. So anyway, always check the status of your K-rail. But we figured it out. We realized, oh, we can customize the paint color that goes out there, and that was a really easy way to minimize the cost as well as we looked at scaling this overall. I think another thing that our approach is try to make this as easy as possible for businesses. So we provided them with the furniture, we provided them with plants and planters and locks and everything that would go with that, as well as umbrellas. So I think to some extent, some of that organic activity that that Long Beach has been talking about, we wanted it to be almost like a prefab experience for folks so they can just hit the ground running. However, we did start to see more and more of like that personality shine through as it went on. And then regarding branding, I saw one of the comments about local artists. That was our dream, actually, to have local artists paint the murals. And we worked with our local arts and culture commission on that as well. But we had it, that was like one of the challenges. We just couldn't move quickly enough on the process in selecting artists and then pushing those forward. And again, these are neighborhood districts, so they're very protective over like the aesthetic. And I think it was a missed opportunity, but something I think that we should still continue to pursue, as this is likely going to stay around for some time. So those are just some of the highlights.
Oh, that's great. And I think a couple of themes that came up in sort of all of your responses. One was, of course, safety and ensuring that if it is a parking stall that's occupied by a parklet, ensuring that people in that space are safe with vehicular traffic right next to it. And then another theme was, this idea of accessibility. And I know, April, you talked about having to restripe an existing parking lot to identify ADA stalls. But then there's also the added question about, ADA access to the outdoor dining spaces, depending upon whether it's an extension of the sidewalk or if it's at the grade of the street. So were there any sort of insights or lessons learned in terms of, facilitating ADA access through these initiatives and programs?
It's ongoing for Long Beach. I mean, it really is. Long Beach, ADA is immensely important to the city, as is our larger equity plan, but ADA specifically in the right of way is top priority alongside the safety of the parklets themselves. Everyone has an opinion on ADA. We have an ADA coordinator who is fantastic. And, it's kind of like bartering, like, well, what if we did this? And what if our business had that? And admittedly, a standard parklet for one business is 2 parking stalls, 15 feet, maybe. If you put a ramp that's at the grade required for ADA from our standard specifications, you're probably losing a quarter of that parklet just to that ramp if folks are not building a platform. Same thing if you don't have a platform. Is it fair and equitable from an ADA perspective to say, well, you can go ahead and eat at this sidewalk table instead? Is there enough space within these parklets between tables to accommodate wheelchair access? There's so many considerations that we have to have. So it's a balancing act between making sure that the businesses have a feasible parklet that they can continue their operations and continue to make money and employ their employees, and also ensuring that we are taking ADA seriously despite it being a temporary program. Just because it's temporary doesn't mean that ADA is we try to undercut the standards or the requirements in any way. So that's just to kind of give you insight on the conversations that we have, and that's just a very small component and snippet of the type of conversations that are ongoing. But we have our city attorneys heavily involved in our temporary parklet program, and a lot of the roadblocks that we come to is just the importance of ADA and how we work that in all together. Because ultimately we'd have unlimited right of way and we can just open everything up and we have plenty of space to make sure all of these components are put in place for our community members. But there are challenges. And I want to reiterate that every district and every parklet's different. We are a community of 500,000 people, and we have so many businesses, and every district is different. And so it's ongoing, and we continue to navigate that daily.
Sorry, any other quick insights? Jennifer, I see you unmuted.
Well, it was kind of getting away from ADA, but to talk about some of the issues that we've seen regarding maintenance, which it looks like some of the commenters are asking about. I don't know if that's appropriate to go into.
For it. They're doing my job for me, so go for it.
Cool, okay. Well, this kind of goes back to, again, like playing up to the strengths of the business improvement district. So in downtown Glendale, the bid there is excellent on the safety and operations side. So we partnered up with them, and they just kind of took it upon themselves as well to more frequently power wash and ensure that the transient issue has some additional attention. They assisted in locking up and cleaning the tables and chairs. So they were a huge help. I do agree though, I mean, this is something that we've tried to empower each of the businesses and treat the parklets like an extension of their space. And we have that's part of what their extended sidewalk permit is encouraging them to do. We did have a few parklets that were kind of like a shared space, and those where we had like 3 different tenants, for example, using that. And those were the trickiest because nobody would really take ownership of it. So I still don't know how to get past that, except we've had some people say, well, you should just remove the tables and chairs and not let them participate. But that seems counterintuitive, and I'm sure we can come up with a better system than that. And then another thing is trash. I'm sure like the other cities are seeing this all over, but just because everybody's doing takeout now, the trash bins are overflowing. And I don't think city staff or city services, like even if we had more frequent trash services, we just can't keep up. So that's another issue. I think it likely is solved just by having each of the restaurants take a little bit more ownership in that area as well.
And I mean, I think that's a really sort of critical subject in terms of maintenance and who has ownership over the upkeep of that space. Kraig, I wanted to invite you to weigh in from the perspective of the business improvement district. What were some of your either learnings or takeaways or just impressions on that issue?
On the maintenance? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we knew we would be stuck with the maintenance, to be quite honest and candid. I mean, that was something that was no surprise to us. I think that's why bids exist, because we know what we could do above and beyond what the city's baseline levels of services are. And we perform in that capacity with that standard. So that didn't come as a surprise. It just, there is a certain bandwidth that, an organization has to realize that if in fact it's catering to one aspect of the district more than others, there's a compromise there. And so we have to be mindful of that. We wanted to be able to provide those areas that don't have parklets, that we are still responsible for, that they're still maintained to the standards that we've established, versus now the areas that are closed or have parklets and that additional services are required. So we're cognizant of that. That's not going to change, but we knew that we would have to step up and provide additional services for the areas, especially the area of Pine Avenue that's closed. Parking, as you mentioned earlier, we also are cognizant of parking relative to access to parking and the revenue associated with parking, because our district gets 50% of the parking meter revenue that's generated in the downtown. So now it's, we look at it from a fiscal standpoint, as well as an accessibility and convenience standpoint. So today we're tracking on how much we're losing on parking and how much we have lost on parking by allowing these spaces to be converted into commercial space. And the other component is retail. We talked about that a little earlier. Retail will say, okay, well, what about us and parking? But they also say, what about us and utilizing the public space, because currently our Open Streets program is only available for dining purposes. It's not available to extend the economic opportunity for those retailers to use that same public space. So again, when we go into this new iteration, we're going to have these conversations. We're already having these conversations. It's required to have these conversations now, and to really look at it from a more holistic perspective. And I know the restaurant industry is hurting. We know that. That's not a secret. We need to help them as much as we possibly can. But there's also more, there's other types of brick and mortar businesses that also, especially storefront, that need the assistance as well. We need to be cognizant of that.
Shruti, can I kind of piggyback off of what Kraig was mentioning? So I think it's important to note that a lot of our bids, 4th Street and Belmont Shore, where there are a lot of these temporary parklets, they are also parking metered, and they too share in the revenues of those of the parking. And to Craig's point, those funds benefit the entire bid. And that includes the retail, that includes the salons and the restaurants. So there's that balancing act with, not just having to recreate your budget and account for the loss of revenues, but how do you equitably manage that when the money is supposed to support the entire bid, but these parklets are really focused on their restaurants. We are also tracking the revenue in the Belmont Shore and the 4th Street areas to see what the impacts are. But I do want to address someone's comment about private property parking. That, I think those of us who are familiar with how municipalities operate, private parking satisfies code requirements for businesses. And so again, for this temporary program, they flex the code in that an entire private parking lot could be, I don't want to say entire, but a significant portion of a private parking lot can be utilized for this temporary program, as we saw in the photos that I shared. Currently, we're actually having, which probably sounds crazy, but we're having our special events team manage the permitting for those private areas. And so what an organization has to do, and this also goes into like the outside, I want to say gyms. So gyms are a good example. They require a site plan, and it's not CAD, it's not fancy. It's just literally draw it on a piece of paper and show me what it's supposed to look like. And they submit it with a packet, which includes a general application and indemnification and insurance. And that's it. And you get a permit to turn your private parking lot into an outdoor space for your business. And what Kraig also mentioned was that the parklets have a specific purpose. What the city tried to do is we wanted to focus parklets for restaurants because all of the other businesses were still allowed to operate outdoors. So retail, or they were still open. Retail has been open by and large most of the time. Even though we had this outdoor dining ban that's just been recently lifted, we were the gyms were still able to operate outside. So we really wanted to be able to put our efforts toward our restaurants so they can continue to operate. And, we have a large city, finite amount of resources, so we really wanted to dedicate that to them.
Great. So we're actually nearly at an hour, so I'm going to give Christine the opportunity to let folks who are in attendance today know how to get their AIA credits, and then we'll continue with the conversation right after that.
Thank you. Okay, in the chat, there's a link to a Google form. So we'll hold that open for about an hour or so after the program concludes. But we're going to go over time here just to get to everybody's questions. So for those who need to leave, you can go ahead and click on that link to complete the attendance verification form. And if it's okay with the panelists, it's sticking around maybe another 15 minutes or so, depending on the questions, if that's okay. and we'll just continue. So I'll leave that link there in the chat box. I'll post it in a few minutes if it gets buried in all of the questions in the chat box.
Okay, so I think this is sort of a good way to pivot to the question of the future. And we've kind of been touching about it all throughout the conversation in terms of, you know, what these programs might look and feel like, or what the upcoming challenges are. But we have, you know, a few questions in the chat box. And one of them is that, assuming when emergency orders are lifted from indoor dining, the public will most likely want to dine predominantly outdoors. How are your organizations planning for long-term implementation of some of these parklet strategies? So sort of broad sweeping question, in the long term, what will implementation look like?
So right now we are actually asking businesses to submit the documents required per our permanent parklet program. And our team is sifting through those documents and working with those businesses on getting all of those things straight and aligned, so that when the indoor dining ban is lifted, we are not then starting this process. So we are telling them that it's important to move forward with your paperwork. However, you know, we obviously can't issue permanent parklet permits at this time. The team is understanding that they're going to have to be flexible and some things are going to have to change. I'm not actually part of the permanent parklet team. I'm adjacent. I'm not sure exactly what they're adjusting to support businesses to be able to achieve these permanent parklets with a lot less barriers, but I know that that's a discussion that's being had, and I know that Kraig can probably chime in further on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Kraig.
Yeah, during the most recent closure of outdoor dining, our recommendation, DLBA's recommendation to the city was, let's take advantage of this downtime and let's create policy. So when we do resume outdoor dining, that there is a standardization of parklets for all those businesses currently participating in it, as well as long-term policy of how they could maintain that space if in fact it moved into permanent closure. And this is talking about a closure, not only a closure of Pine Avenue, but also a closure and use of space that is not closing a street, that parklets are only being utilized adjacent to the business and taking up parking space, but not closing the entire street as we're doing on Pine Avenue. So this is the part that the city has taken the lead on. They hired a contractor to come up with some standardization of the use of the area, the space, and the design of these spaces. It's a special event production company who has worked with other cities in creating parklets in those cities, standardizing the space, branding the space. All those components that we talked about a little earlier this evening has already been done in these other cities by this one contractor. So we recommended the contractor to the city. The city has now contracted with that vendor who is charged with bringing these components and these requirements to the city to see if in fact the city can embrace and adopt these as policy. You know, that we were hopeful that we would have gotten that done by the end of the calendar year last month, but it seems as though that's creeping now into obviously 2021, and hopefully we'll be able to get that done sooner rather than later. That's really going to be the template and set the foundation for anything that we will do in the future.
Jennifer, I'd like to also ask you to weigh in on the question, and then also maybe share your thoughts on, you know, what has community reactions been to this, and what do you anticipate in terms of, you know, interest or excitement or not for some of these measures continuing?
Sure. So I will say there's been a lot of positive reaction from the community. And similar to what Kraig was saying, especially with our urban design team, we want to be able to take advantage of really this opportunity to continue to build on our open streets initiatives. So part of the reason that I'm here today is actually to listen to some of the ideas on moving from a temporary to permanent concept with this. Now, I think that there's, again, it's going to be negotiation with some of these businesses, and not all the parklets are going to stay as well. I think we've seen that some locations are better than others, and some have been more effective as well at really maintaining that activity, as Raul was saying. I will also tell you that I will likely call Studio 111, who is our lifeline on these types of open streets initiatives, to really get a better understanding of how do you move forward with this in a cost-effective way, and is there some other in between like, we don't necessarily want to be temporary, but permanent may still be a little expensive. So where is the middle road there, especially with the budgetary realities? All cities are getting really hit with the loss of sales tax revenue. So I don't think that they're going to have the budget to be able to take on new infrastructure improvement projects, but I bet that there's a low cost way of doing so. So we're looking at taking that type of approach, but we have to still talk to more of our businesses in our community and our public works department as well to see if they would be on board.
Yeah, because that was another question that came up in the chat, is to what degree are the engineers, the traffic circulation, all of those concerns, to what degree have they been integrated thus far in this sort of react immediately kind of response, and how is all of that going to be mitigated moving forwards? What does the future of that look like?
Well, at least for Glendale, because this has been an economic development-led project. I mean, I joke that they don't give us stamps in economic development because we would approve everything. So with the public works department, though, they have seen the big picture, and they really have been very responsive and on board. There's a lot of conversations between the parking managers and the engineers, and our public works, the right-of-way folks as well. And as April was talking about with fire and all these tents that are popping up, which are their own issue and totally out of compliance in many cases. So public works and the engineers are definitely in lockstep with this. But I will say that at least tapping into a more deliberate urban design component from the planning perspective, that's something that we've been in triage mode. So how do we do this in a more intentional fashion so that it really is achieving those greater goals instead of just let's get something out quickly?
So I'm going to share a link with the group before we get off that has our permanent parklet guidelines, and this was developed over the course of quite a while in conjunction with our traffic engineer, our right-of-way folks, stormwater. I mean, everyone, development services, health, everyone had a say in how we develop this. Now, that's to say that that is our pre-COVID permanent parklet guideline, not our post-COVID permanent parklet guideline, because I do know that things may change. One of the interesting things that we found during, and Kraig knows this, mid parklet program, the gas department came out and said, oh, you need to move this parklet because it's over a gas line. And nobody had any idea, not public works, no one, but our energy resources department knew that there was a gas line underneath this parklet. And we went back and forth, and we realized again, and I'm sure Jennifer can contest to this, is that it's an ongoing conversation between all of the departments within a single agency, because we have our specialties, we function in our lanes, but oftentimes the lanes merge into each other, and it's been a learning experience. So we definitely want to be able to lower the barrier of entry to a permanent parklet for our businesses, but still do our very best in ensuring that all of the technical specifications are kept in mind, so that down the road we don't issue a permanent parklet and have water or gas or another agency that's not typically involved in these types of programs come and tell us that a permanent parklet has to be moved or there's a safety issue. So We do have a lot of our engineers and our experts involved, but we're always learning that it really touches every part of the city, this program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, expanding on that point, and Kraig, just not to put you on the spot, but what are the chances of Pine Avenue remaining closed post-COVID?
You could put me on the spot anytime you want. It's part of the job. Let me tell you, that doesn't change whatsoever. What's the chances? If I was a betting person, I would bet that depending on how the behavior is with these establishments during this temporary phase will be an indicator of what we could do long-term on a permanent basis. Compliance is really, really important. And some businesses comply better than others. And when you have people who don't comply, that may ruin it for others, it could inhibit the chances of it becoming permanent. And I think we would go through, for us, we would do our greater due diligence once we come out of COVID and there's a greater percentage of vaccine that's been distributed and the consumer feels much safer going out into public. I think we would do greater due diligence, see really what the appetite and the attitude is, not only with those businesses, but with the surrounding neighborhood and the residents, knowing that this now becomes a closed vehicular street to pedestrian only. And what does that do for the ambiance of the street and to the quality of life of the neighborhoods around that area? So it's just, I don't think it's a, yes, it's going to happen. No, it won't happen. I think we really want to take our time in making a strategic decision and not have to vacillate back and forth because something worked or did not work.
Yeah, and on that note, Raul, I guess that's a question for you as well. As a business owner, what do you think might be some of the trade-offs that you will be weighing once the pandemic restrictions are lifted and the question about keeping or extending the use of the outdoor parklets comes up?
For us at the Glendale, so we have several locations. In that particular location, as I mentioned earlier, the sidewalk is fairly narrow. So, and more people want to dine outdoors. I mean, that's been a huge growth. We always knew that, and we've always prepared for that. The other stores we have, especially the ones we've built ourselves, have huge, probably twice as big, the outdoor dining as the inside. We're busy mostly in the mornings and in the afternoons and early evenings. So it's very conducive to that. So I'd be a proponent of it. I would love it. I think not only would it benefit me, but it makes, as I mentioned earlier, it makes the whole street and the whole thing, work better. But as I'm sure Jennifer will agree with me, there's going to be a whole bunch of issues that we're going to have to overcome. Just you name it, from cost to liability to other tenants and other neighbors that are not going to be too, good thing for us is hardly any retail on brand right now, but there are some shops that do, I guess there is, thinking about it, there is some, and I think that's going to be a challenge. And, in most cities, parking is tough. I've been to Long Beach, parking is real tough. So, you're going to have a fight on your hands to try to take those few parking spaces, especially the ones on the curb. And so I think it's a great thing. The fact that we put these up and we got to, if hadn't been for COVID and we hadn't put all of these temporary, I'm sure everybody will call them temporary, dining facilities outside, we would have never known and we wouldn't be here talking about it today. So I think, that's probably a good outcome, and I'm sure some cities are going to incorporate it in certain areas. I don't see them going up and down the street everywhere. That's going to be a very difficult thing, but there'll probably be certain areas where they'll do it. I know that. I'd be a proponent of it, but we'll see how it goes.
Great, thank you. I think, in terms of just getting a variety of perspectives, this panel has been really helpful in understanding a number of different points of view on the subject of outdoor dining. We've had a lot of good questions. I think we've touched upon many of them during our conversation. And, I think all of the panelists, you've brought such a wealth of knowledge to this. So thank you for sharing that with us today. I think in the interest of time, we'd probably want to wrap up here. But thank you all once again, and thank you to everyone in the audience who came to participate in this event with us today, and for sharing your questions and thoughts. I'm going to ask the panelists to share your emails or contact information if you are open to having further questions shared with you. And then I'm going to also ask Christine to wrap up with any final thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. We really appreciate it. As I stated in a response in the chat, we are recording this program, and we will be posting that on our website. We'll have a notice of that in our weekly Chapter Happenings e-blast, which goes out every Thursday. If you're not subscribed, please do so. I'll put a link to our website in the chat box. Looks like everybody's the panelists are putting their emails in there as well. So that's great. Be sure you copy those. And if there's any questions, most of you have my email address. So just shoot us an email and let us know if there's anything else we can provide for you. So thank you for attending tonight. It was a great turnout. Thank you to Kraig and Jennifer and Raul and April. And of course, Shruti, she did all the work for this program. So it was really great. Thank you so much.